This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
Alright, so this is Ching Sung again, and I'm here to bring you a video on UW Delver. I think that despite the fact that we have a new metagame coming up with the release of M13, I think it's still good to take a look at Delver and what it can do, because I think going forward it's still going to be the defining deck of our metagame. What I want to take a look here at this week is Delver's ability to play the long game and how Delver utilizes its resources in a war of attrition against decks ostensibly better built to handle this sort of thing. Here I'm playing against Grixis control, and this is a post-sideboard game. The thing to note with the list is that when I sideboard, I bring in things like Consecrated Sphinx, and I slow down the deck a little bit in the hopes that I can still be significantly faster than Grixis control while maintaining a stronger long game, essentially. And you'll see that come into play, I think, in the second game in this video against Esper. But I want to start here with this game against Grixis and showcase some of the weaknesses of Grixis and some of the strengths of Delver and its ability to flexibly utilize its resources in a variety of different ways to disrupt its opponent's game plan. So obviously we begin with the hand that I kept, which is a 1-land hand that has a Ponder and a Delver of Secrets. This is a little bit loose of a keep, I will admit that, but my general mulligan rule is that I ask myself, is my 6 going to be better? And I think that overall my 6 is not going to be better than this, and so I kept this. The main reason being is that I have this Ponder, this Vapor Snag, and this Mana Leak, where if my Ponder finds a second land reasonably quickly, I can play with these 4 cards, and that gives me a little bit of early game. And with Delver, one of the worst things that can happen to you against the control lists is that you can flood early. If you can't present threats early, it doesn't matter how many Ponders or Vapor Snags or Thought Scours or whatnot you draw. The mana advantage that a control deck is going to establish over you early in the game while you aren't putting pressure on them is really, really bad. So if I mulligan into something like 3 lands, Blade Splicer, Restoration Angel, Mana Leak, that's just it's going to be a terrible hand. This hand has a Delver of Secrets, and the fact that this hand has a Delver of Secrets that can flip early and apply pressure is in fact a huge incentive to keep a very land-light hand. So let's take a look at how this game plays out. Obviously my turn 1 play is Delver, and he does nothing because he's Grixis control, and then I'm going to reveal an island, which I'll play, and then that allows me to Ponder. So my Ponder sees 2 lands and a Snapcaster Mage, so I will admit that I get a little bit lucky and I hit my first 4 land drops with this deck. I'm going to put land, Snapcaster Mage, land on top, because I don't really need to hit my 4th land drop on turn 4. The next turn I'm going to play my Blade Splicer, and then I can hold up Mana Leak and Vapor Snag for a turn to, in general, annoy him. So he's gonna attempt to Whip Flare away my Delver here. I think this is actually a bad use of resources. One of the awkward things about Grixis in this matchup is that your Whip Flares are in this weird position where they don't kill Restoration Angel and the Blade Splicer token, so you end up in this situation where your sweepers often leave things lying around. Even if you run Slag Storm as a supplement, you just aren't sweeping the board consistently enough, and it can put you in weird situations. Given that he's aggressively using Whip Flare, I think that with my threat-heavy hand, I can outlast his threats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Vapor Snag the Delver here so that I can replay it later. The other reason to do this is because my Vapor Snags aren't good for a lot else in this matchup. his main threat is Lone Revenant. He has Phantasmal Image, which I saw in Game 1, so I know that there's some utility there. And so the reason I left in some of my Vapor Snags was so that I could protect my own threats with from sweepers, like I just did, and I could kill his Phantasmal Images if necessary. So, but otherwise, Vapor Snag is just not very good in this matchup. So getting some utility out of it is, in fact, key. So obviously I draw Snapcaster Mage, which I knew was happening. And then I'm just going to go ahead and play the Blade Splicer, because it makes better use of my mana. The other option is to Delver plus Mana Leak, but there's really nothing that Grixis can do on 3 that's terribly threatening, other than maybe Pristine Talisman. But I haven't seen that, and I really just don't think he's doing that sort of thing. So on 3, he's going to image my Blade Splicer, which is perfectly fine. I'm okay with that because I have the Snapcaster for Vapor Snag to deal with this nonsense. As long as I kill the Golem token, trading Splicer for Splicer is not a big deal. So you will note that I put the lands in the wrong order. I put the Seachrome Coast on top first. What I should have done is so I don't have 4 mana this turn. Otherwise I would have probably just gone for the Restoration Angel Blink. As it is, I can go ahead and just Vapor Snag the token and get in with the Golem, which is just about as good. So he's going to Ponder here, not really knowing what he sees. And then I'm just going to get in with my team. At this point in time, because I have the Restoration Angel up, I'm obviously okay with going for the Blade Splicer. So he's going to use Snapcaster Mage as just an instant speed 2-1 here. And I'm perfectly okay with him trading off some resources here. Because note that the 2 creatures he can trade off are the Blade Splicer itself and the Snapcaster Mage, both of which die to Whip Flare, which he already has in his graveyard, and I've seen a bunch of, and I know is his primary sweeper. So therefore I want to, in general, I'm okay with trading off stuff that dies for Whip Flare as long as I already got value out of it. And I already got to flashback a Vapor Snag off of my Snapcaster Mage, whereas he's not getting any value off of his Snapcaster Mage. So he attempts to make this trade here. And I'm just going to go Restoration Angel and blink the Blade Splicer. He's going to play a Lone Revenant here, which is actually going to be annoying because it stops my Golem tokens on the ground. I could have held up Mana Leak for this instead of playing the Restoration Angel, but that would have involved me losing my Blade Splicer, and I still think that either way my position is still pretty good. Remember that he can't attack with his Lone Revenant because I've got a pair of 3/3s to block. So even if he has the Lone Revenant here, the Restoration Angel is going to end up being a flyer in the air, so I can still put pressure on him, and he's at 12. So unfortunately here, my luck is sort of evened out in the sense that I drew the lands early that I needed, but now I'm sort of flooding. If you've noticed that the spells that I've played, the only spell I've drawn this game is Snapcaster Mage. So I am flooding out a little bit. But that's not but that's sort of, variance in its way even out. I play the Delver of Secrets in order just to put more pressure on the board. If he had a Slag Storm, definitely he would have already used it. The Delver might prompt a Whip Flare, but at this point in time, I want to put as much pressure on the board as possible, and hopefully force him into a situation where he has to attempt to sweep and leave my Restoration Angel and Golem tokens alone. So once again, he's going to Ponder. And do nothing. So what I revealed last turn was a Snapcaster Mage. Sorry, I didn't have this up, so you didn't see that. And this turn to the Delver. So I'm going to draw the Snapcaster Mage. And now what this allows me to do is this allows me to hold up 6 mana for Mana Leak plus Snapcaster Mage on Mana Leak, which means that no matter what his next spell is, it's not going to resolve, because he obviously is just not going to be able to play anything relevant if I make him pay 6 in addition. He goes for Combust here, which is sort of really sad for me because I can't counter it. Obviously, if I could Mana Leak this, I would. And this puts me in the awkward situation where I have no threats that can get through his Lone Revenant on the ground. I can start swinging to just deal him damage and abyssing my guys. But my problem with that plan is that I think that I'm still not bad off trying to take this game longer because I have this Delver. And so if this Delver flips, once again, I have a flying threat to apply pressure to him. And if I start allowing this Lone Revenant to attack, because if I do attack, he definitely can kill a Snapcaster Mage. So if I allow this Lone Revenant to start attacking, I could easily end up in a position where he's just drawing too many cards and can deal with my threats. I don't think that I have enough threats to start swinging for the fences yet, basically. So once again, we continue to hold up this Snapcaster plus Mana Leak shenanigan, and nothing continues to happen over here because he's drawing like defensive nonsense, basically. So sadly, I draw another island, and I can't do anything with my Delver, so we're just going to sit here and stare at each other for another turn. This is actually bad for me, because over this entire time, he's able to play stuff like Forbidden Alchemy, or things of that nature, and try to eventually basically get ahead. This Consecrated Sphinx obviously can't resolve, so I'm just going to Mana Leak it. So you may ask why I haven't Snapcastered back a Ponder yet. The reason is because I feel the need to attempt to protect my Delver of Secrets from removal. My Delver should have flipped by now, or I'm expecting it to flip soon. And so utilizing this double Mana Leak to protect my Delver from removal is actually something that I'm interested in doing. After having Mana Leak this Consecrated Sphinx, it becomes much more attractive to simply Snapcaster the Ponder on my turn, because what's going to happen is he's going to be able to resolve a removal spell because I'm not going to be able to make him pay excessive amounts for it. So something like a Doomblade, I can no longer Mana Leak. So I draw another Delver, which I'm going to play. And once again, I don't attack. And I'm not sure I like this decision that I made to leave up the Snapcaster Mana Leak again, but he did just play a Consecrated Sphinx, and he has been, in general, not doing anything, which leads me to believe that his hand is highly defensive, or full of expensive sorceries, or full of land, or other things that he can't really be doing. The other reason to obviously flashback the Ponder here is because I drew the second Delver, so flipping both Delvers is in fact something that I want to be doing. What ended up happening in this game is I was looking at this Ponder, and I guess it just didn't click or something, and so I didn't end up flashbacking a Ponder. I think this is a bad decision on my part, but overall, it still shows that Delver can manage its resources relatively semi-efficiently, and still manage to get there. So what he's doing here is he's flashing back a Whip Flare. And this actually plays into my favor because this allows me to use my Snapcaster Mana Leak to counter the Whip Flare. If I had flashback the Ponder the previous turn, obviously I'd be setting up my deck, but then this, and this would all be dead, and we'd be left with 2/3/3s against the Lone Revenant. Of course, he has a Mana Leak for my Mana Leak. So that's what's going to happen anyway. So now what's going to happen here is our Golems and the Lone Revenant are just going to stare at each other until someone draws something of relevance. Once again, I draw a Mana Leak, which is not the best in the situation. And he draws a Phantasmal Image to copy his Lone Revenant. Once again, continuing to stare at each other. He's going to hit me for 4 here, and the reason I don't kill this Lone Revenant is because it's not going to draw him a card, and so me at 19 life means I can easily take 4 from this without too much concern. I draw a Thought Scour, so I'm just going to play it to cantrip, and this Moorland Haunt ends up being a pretty good draw because it allows me a little bit of counterplay. So his Lone Revenant comes in again, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to trade a Spirit Token and a Golem for his Lone Revenant because I can repeat that trade next turn. There's no reason not to block with both Golems here to play around some crazy removal spell like Go for the Throat. This way I make sure that his Lone Revenant goes down. So awkwardly I continue to flood. But the fact that I have this Moorland Haunt continues to be good for me. Given that he's at 9 life, I was planning on trading both of these for the Lone Revenant, but looking at the fact that he's been very defensive and had been missing land drops, I suspected that he had some form of removal spell. So I went for just the Chump instead to prevent him from drawing a card and to be able to counterattack for 3 with my Golem. It turns out to be a reasonable play, and he obviously just goes for the Doomblade. This allows me to grab a Blade Splicer. He draws a Loot House, which is actually good for him, and he pitches a land. And obviously can't attack because I have more than enough blockers to chump his Lone Revenant. So therefore I'm going to make a Spirit. And then I play Gitaxian Probe, see a Mana Leak, which is irrelevant in this situation. And then I continue just basically to cycle Gitaxian Probes here, because for some reason I drew 3 Gitaxian Probes in a row. And it's not really a card that I'm going to use in any way, shape, or form at this point. The information isn't that valuable anymore. So I'm just cycling it so that I can get more cards. I can poke him for 1 with the Flyer. And then I can Flashback Ponder here. So I end up seeing Restoration Angel, Ponder, Ponder, and obviously I'm going to draw the Angel. And play my land, and this will allow me to put more power on the table. He loots real quick and discards the Mana Leak, so now that I know the coast is probably clear to play my Angel because the Mana Leak just got discarded. He's going to loot again. And once again leave back his 4/4 to block. I don't Angel here because I don't feel the particular need to. I feel that with him on, even though he has double Loot House, the actual number of cards that he's going to play be able to play against me is relatively low. And so therefore, I think that I have 1 or 2 more turns where I can try to set up the Angel in a position where I can maybe protect it with Mana Leak. Because there's no doubt he's going to be expending mana on these lighthouses. And so this means that my Mana Leak is going to be much more effective. So here I'm just going to swing for the fences because I've got enough gas at this point that basically I can do whatever I want. He's going to attempt to block my Blade Splicer. I don't agree with this decision. I think that he should probably just block the Golem token and attempt to kill it so that a Whip Flare is going to be much, much better for him. With this, he's going to need to find a removal spell for the Golem token and a Whip Flare, and he's going to be in serious trouble if I have Restoration Angel, which I do. Although, there's really no huge need. Because he's taking so much damage at this point in time, there's actually no need for me to blink the Angel, just due to the fact that I have all of these things. And so if he sweeps, I can just Angel at the end of turn and kill him in the air. So essentially what ends up happening is I just ponder and put some stuff back and then use Gitaxian Probe to burn through my library. I see he's a combust, but once again, it's not going to be a big issue because he's probably going to have to loot it away. He loots away an island, and a Think Twice happens. Then he loots again. Loots away that combust. Ponders. And finds a Whip Flare, but I have Mana Leak for it, and the game is over. So the key thing here is that to note is that because he took the 3 off of the Golem, I have just so many different ways to kill him no matter what he finds. I have this Moorland Haunt and Restoration Angel at the end of his turn for 4 power worth of flyers. So not only does he need to find a way to kill these 2 creatures, he also needs to find a way of defending against an end-step Moorland Haunt plus Restoration Angel, which means he needs a Sweeper plus 2 removal spells. And so therefore, basically there's just absolutely no way he's surviving this. Maybe he gets in with the Lone Revenant. Maybe he gets in with the Lone Revenant if he has a Sweeper, but once again, he's just in a terribly tough position. So what happened here in this game as we go through it? The key thing to note is, from a resource management perspective, Delver actually has a substantial ability to burn through its deck and find critical resources at critical times. If you look, we saw similar numbers of cards, right? He has 26 cards left in his library, I have 28. So we saw similar numbers of cards. I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lands in play. He's got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lands in play. So he's drawn 2 more lands than me. But in general, you can see we've drawn similar numbers of lands and spells, right? And this is something that is a strength of Delver that a lot of people don't realize. Its ability to burn through its deck and actually to utilize a lot of cards over the course of the game is quite substantial. Where is Delver generating this card advantage from, right? Grixis is using things like Whip Flare, is using things like Lone Revenant, is using Ponders and whatnot. So, where is this card advantage coming from Delver? It's coming from VCA from running a slightly low land count and running a bunch of cantrips like Gitaxian Probe and Ponder, right? It's also coming from Snapcaster Mage, flashing back Ponder and Gitaxian Probe. It's coming from Mana Leak, preventing its opponent's card advantage, and it's coming from things like Restoration Angel and Blade Splicer being extremely efficient threats that allow the Delver player to trade efficiently with opposing resources. Right? The big key here is that if you look at the way the Grixis player played in this game, he played a lot of 1-for-1s. And then supplemented it with a few ponders and things of that nature. And that's a game that plays very, very well into Delver's hands. If you're playing against Delver, you need to be getting as much value as possible out of your card advantage spells, because this deck, even without drawing things like Consecrated Sphinx and Gideon Jura, has substantial ways of generating card advantage. Moorland Haunt, Snapcaster Mage, Restoration Angel, and the efficiency of Blade Splicer allows you to actually attrition your opponent out in a very reasonable basis without really looking at a pretty normal draw on both of our parts. The key thing here in this game was, first, my opponent's Whip Flares did not that much because he couldn't position them effectively. I was able to Mana Leak the last one, and I was able to Mana Leak 2 of them, and Vapor Snag to protect my Delver for the third one. So his Whip Flares did basically nothing. All right. The second thing was this Lone Revenant did basically nothing the entire game. Sure, it held back my golem tokens a little bit, but one of the major sources of card advantage for the Grixis deck is Lone Revenant. And by stopping the Lone Revenant, I stopped his ability to generate card volume. The key thing to remember, one of the key things to remember when playing against Control is going to rely on its ability to 1-for-1 you, and then generate card advantage in a few key places. Creatures like Lone Revenant are a way that this happens, and spells like Whip Flare, Sweepers, are a way that happens. Otherwise, a control player is doing things like playing Doomblade, which is a 1-for-1, Combust, which is a 1-for-1, right? Ponder, which is basically a 1-for-1, and Mana Leak, which is basically a 1-for-1. So I stopped his critical card advantage engines, right? I stopped Snapcaster Mage. One of the Snapcaster Mages because he used it simply as an instant speed 2-1. The other one got some value, but not a lot. I stopped his Consecrated Sphinx with a Mana Leak. I stopped his Lone Revenant by simply having 3/3 Golem tokens that he couldn't attack through. And I stopped his Whip Flares via Mana Leak and Vapor Snag. So, by stopping the control player's ability to generate card advantage, I prevented the control player from establishing an advantage in card volume. And you'll note that this is recurrent in the second game I'm going to show you, which is Delver versus Esper. By stopping the control player from establishing a card volume advantage over you, Delver actually can win the game just through attrition because it's once again the proactive deck. So therefore, if you both trade at an efficient rate, the proactive deck is going to be the one that has some resources left over, and that means that those resources, whatever they are just going to kill the opponent. So I want to talk more about this concept of card volume and how it relates to how you fight this war of attrition in the second game I'm going to show you, which is Delver versus Esper Control. So last we left off, we were looking at Delver versus Grixis. Now let's look at Delver versus Esper and examine the idea of card volume a little more thoroughly. Once again, so getting to the actual game itself, you'll see once again that I kept a one-line hand. But this one-line hand has a lot of action at 1 and 2, and so I don't think that a 6 is actually going to be substantially better than this. It's a little awkward that this land is a Glacial Fortress, but what do you know? As far as my odds of hitting a land are concerned, in the event that you're curious why I keep these hands, let's take a look at the odds mathematically. Okay, so let's take a look at this mathematically speaking. With 21 lands left in my deck and 54 cards in my deck as well, I am 39% to hit my drop, which is rough 61% to miss it. So if I need to miss 3 draw steps in a row, alright, you know what, let's do it the easy way. 0.61 cubed, I am 77% to hit one of those 3 draws, because I'm only 22.36%, 23% to miss all 3 draws. Now, I actually think that my position is playable if I hit an island or a Seachrome Coast on my 4th draw as well, and that would be 13 out of 48 because the Thought Scour is going to take away 2 extra cards. And so I'm 27% to hit that. So if I'm roughly in a position where you can see that I have basically a 85%-ish, 85%-ish chance to hit one land in those 4 draw steps that makes my position playable. I actually think those odds are decent, and it's something that I'll take, especially over an unknown 6. So that's the reason I keep one-line hands like this with Delver. I do think that sometimes it comes back to bite you. It doesn't in this game, obviously, but I mean, like, it's, I think, an acceptable risk. So you can see here that he leads off with an isolated Chapel, and the key thing here to look at is I see Sorin, Terminus, Memoricide, and Think Twice. If possible, I want to try to avoid letting this and this resolve. The reason being is that this is going to take away some critical resources that allow me to attrition him. Primarily, it's going to probably take away Mana Leak. The other option for it to take away is something like Blade Splicer or Snapcaster Mage, none of which I'm really a fan of him memoriciding. So I want to make sure that this doesn't resolve. Long and short of it is big. This card's fine, and it's nice to know that he has a Terminus and is also only on 2 lands. So this is what I've seen off of the Cadaxian Probe, and it's good to remember that I've seen this. Off of the Cadaxian Probe, I draw planes, and I'm not going to be able to play anything on turn 1 anyway, so I'm just going to lay the planes out there and make my Glacial Fortress come in untapped. Obviously, he's just going to think twice here, which will give me an opportunity to get this Delver into play. As expected, he's going to think twice. So here he draws Terminus, which is his second one, and attempts to miracle it. This is what I'm talking about with a card volume utilization type thing. Terminus is a way for him to get ahead on cards, and yeah, it's a little awkward as a 6-drop, but he's got 2, he's got a Sorin, and he's got a Memoricide, and so it's reasonably likely that if he just holds this and doesn't go for it as a 1-for-1, it will end up in a situation where he can use it to get ahead on cards. The Memoricide is good protection against mana leaks, especially since I'm playing Blade Splicer and Restoration Angel, and he knows that. And so therefore, getting it down in the face of like a Blade Splicer is not that unlikely. So if he looks for a spot to Memoricide properly, he can make sure that his Terminuses are going to resolve, and that's going to put him way ahead on cards. I don't like this miracle here when I only have 1/1 Delver. Yeah, he doesn't really have anything else to deal with this Delver, but the Delver also might not flip, and there's a variety of other things that make me sort of want to hang on to this Terminus. I don't think this is necessarily a bad decision, but you have to remember that in order to win on card volume, you need to be able to get ahead on cards in some way, shape, or form, and Terminus is a way of getting ahead on cards. The thing to realize with his hand is that his hand is in general short on ways of getting ahead on cards. Sorin is relatively vulnerable in this matchup because it doesn't produce flyers, and so yeah, it produces blockers, but it can definitely get taken down, so that's no guarantee. And he really only has that one Terminus to really get ahead on cards. The Memoricide might even put him behind on cards because I might not have anything in my hand that he Memoricides. So for example, if I Mana Leak something and then he Memoricides Mana Leak, if I don't have a second Mana Leak in my hand, that actually puts him behind on cards. Because he's spending a card for something that doesn't affect the board. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect on the game. It just means that temporarily it puts him behind on cards, which is not somewhere he wants to be in this matchup. Because Delver is actually quite capable of producing a substantial card volume to combat you. So, not sure I like this Terminus, but I'm not playing it. It's also interesting to note that he drew an island, because there was only one island in his hand when I looked at it, at Gitaxian Probe. So as you can see here, I draw a second Mana Leak. This makes the Memoricide even more awkward, because obviously Mana Leak is the most likely thing for him to Memoricide, and so I need to make sure that that doesn't resolve. Which means I'm going to be in this awkward situation where I actually can't play anything until I successfully counter the Memoricide. My opponent sees me miss my third land drop and goes ahead and rams a spell into Mana Leak. I think this is not actually a bad decision because it's obvious that I have the Mana Leak, and if he's just looking to get it out of my hand, it's not a bad thing to do. There's obviously no reason to allow Sorin to resolve, so I'm just going to do it. So once again here, I miss another land drop. This is the play I disagree with. Here, once again, he rams Memoricide. I guess assuming that since I already played a Mana Leak, it's unlikely that I have another. I think this spell is too important to get Mana Leaked. There is a reason I kept a 2-land hand, because that's all he's seen. He's seen me play 2 lands and a cantrip. And so there's a reason I kept a hand like this, and it's gotta mean that it has some action of some sort. It could mean I got a bunch of Blade Splicers and I'm really only looking to hit one land drop. It could mean I've got Snapcaster Mages, or it could mean I've got a bunch of mana leaks. And so I think this Memoricide naked is not that great of a play. It's possible he doesn't have really much other options, given what I've seen of his deck in his hand. That's not an unreasonable assumption. But even so, I still think hanging on to this Memoricide is potentially better, especially in the face of Terminus, where you want to try to resolve this pre-Terminus. Or especially if you hung on to this second Terminus, getting to resolve this pre both of your Terminuses is pretty good. So obviously, I'm just ecstatic here and in the clear to be able to mana leak this Memoricide and protect my mana leaks in general. This gives me the opportunity to play the Blade Splicer, because I doubt he has another Memoricide. Usually when Esper brings in Memoricide in this matchup, they bring in like 2. And so having played one, the odds of him having a second one are very low. It's ditto with something like Surgical Extraction. You very rarely will see the full set. It's usually like a couple. So here he plays Batterskull, and this Batterskull, which I've seen in previous games, is one of the reasons why I left in more Vapor Snags than I usually do, because Vapor Snag is very good at fighting Batterskull. So, once again, I get lucky and rip the land, and then I'm just going to Vapor Snag his Batterskull and get in for 4, dealing him a total of 5. This gives me Snapcaster, Vapor Snag, Snapcaster, Gitaxian Probe. The Snapcaster Gitaxian Probe is an option here, but once again, I know he has a Terminus, so if I commit the Snapcaster and Gitaxian Probe to the board, it doesn't really put me down against Terminus, but there's no reason for me to overextend into the Terminus. This Consecrated Sphinx gives me a good plan of exhausting all his resources and then playing Consecrated Sphinx. As you can see, it's a reasonable option with him having only 2 cards left in hand. So if I can get into a position where he has nothing left and is forced to Terminus as his last card, whether or not I can mana leak it becomes irrelevant, because I can just let it resolve on tap and Consphinx. And so basically the goal is to attempt to hold up Snapcaster Leak to try to delay his Terminus until I get to 6 lands, so that when he does finally Terminus, I can let it resolve and just play Consecrated Sphinx. And just bury him in raw number of cards as opposed to any individual card quality. So you can see a Phantasmal Image here. Awkwardly, I don't have mana leak up to counter it. And then he has Sorin as well. And so the fact that I Vapor Snagged away his Batterskull token ends up hurting me a little bit here, because now I have to deal with a Sorin. It doesn't hurt me too much though, because once again, this is why this deck is so awesome, because I can still Vapor Snag away his token with the second Vapor Snag in my hand. So obviously here, the flexibility of Delver helps me out, because this combination of Thought Scour and Vapor Snag allows me to end up in a situation where I can take out this Sorin over the course of the next 2 turns. With this Snapcaster Mage, I'm not going to be able to get in for 4 against Sorin this turn, but I can definitely do so over the course of the next 2. So I don't really see a need to do much against Sorin this turn. I'm just going to attack here and let him have a life point and kill my Blade Splicer. The reason I do this is to give him a little bit of a false sense of security. The idea being is that I want to be in a position to Snapcaster Vapor Snag at the end of turn to make sure that his Sorin goes away. Sorry, phone. Alright, so I want to be in a position where I can Snapcaster his Sorin away. And this means that I want him to be in a position where he believes he can block the Golem token so he won't Terminus. The Delver of Secrets is sort of non-threatening in this situation, because even if it flips, his Sorin stays alive. He might Terminus here, but I'm hoping that he won't. And as you can see here, he attempts to make a 5/5 token, which is something I was hoping he would do, trying to get value out of his Terminus, and I'm going to punish that with Snapcaster Vapor Snag, getting rid of his Batter Skull, untapping, luckily drawing a land. And so I miss a point here against him because I could have attacked him for 1 with the Delver, because I know the last card in his hand is a Terminus. But I was sort of playing on autopilot. Now you'll note that also I hold this land. This is again a deliberate thing because I want him to Terminus this turn. I think he will anyway, but I hold this land to hopefully convince him that Consecrated Sphinx is not a threat. It's not going to alter my next play, no matter what happens on my next turn. No matter what I draw, I'm going to play this Consecrated Sphinx, and so therefore, it doesn't alter my play. And I think that hopefully it will convince him that I don't have a big 6-drop to play. So obviously he Terminuses dutifully. And then I untap and Consphinx. Once again, there's no reason to play this Gitaxian Probe now. There's no reason to pay 2 life for it when I can just utilize the pay blue for it type thing. I want to cycle them away, but as you can see, he draws a Gideon Jura, which is sort of annoying because it means that my Consecrated Sphinx is only going to get 1 more turn, likely. But that's fine. As you can see here, I drew a Phantasmal Image. Attack his Gideon Jura for 4, and then I'm going to Phantasmal Image away another Consecrated Sphinx, and cycle my next Gitaxian Probe. Yup, and he's going to return his Batter Skull. I'm going to see he returned his Batter Skull, and more lands. I'm going to draw 4 cards from Consecrated Sphinx. Here comes Batter Skull. Here comes Gideon Jura, killing 1 Consecrated Sphinx. So at the end of his turn, I forgot to do the Gut Shot play. I'm going to do it now, because this is... Oh, actually no, apparently I'm not. I thought I Gut Shot killed this Gideon, but maybe that was a different game. So I'm just going to kill his thing naturally, and then Ponder, putting some cards back on top. But as you can see here, like, I'm just extremely far ahead, and I'm literally just looking for whatever way I can use to kill him at this point. It really doesn't make a huge difference that his angel... okay, so this is what I do. I use Gut Shot to take down the Germ Token. So actually, it was probably better just to use Gut Shot to take down the Gideon and hit him for 4. But, once again, at this point in time, it's not really relevant to how I'm killing him. He died when he had no answer to this Consecrated Sphinx, basically. So as you can see here, this is just sort of a formal method of closing out this game. Still, I want to show it to you. So he makes a valiant attempt to fight back with Consecrated Sphinx. But I'm just gonna Gut Shot his Consecrated Sphinx to death, or Vapor Snag his Consecrated Sphinx to death, and it's just game over. Alright, so as you can see, I played 17 turns against Grixis and 12 turns against Esper, and in both games I was able to keep up with the control player, even stay ahead of the control player in card volume. As you can see here against Esper, I'm actually up 6 cards that I've seen, and that's exactly the 6 cards that Consecrated Sphinx has shown me. So you can see how, of course, I'm also up 5 cards in hand, and so you can see 6 of the 5 cards that I'm up are in my hand, and that's a big deal. And so that's the advantage that Consecrated Sphinx is generating me. But you can see that even without that, I'm still keeping up with the control player in terms of number of cards I've seen. And so when you play against Delver, one of the things to keep in mind is that going long, Delver can actually generate a very, very substantial card volume, and so it's not just as easy as weathering their first assault and then killing them, because Delver's not a deck that runs out of gas easily. And so you really have to actively be trying to run Delver out of gas. This means that your advantage generating cards in card volume, your volumizing sort of plays, your Forbidden Alchemies, your Think Twices, your Consecrated Sphinxes, your Terminuses, your Planeswalkers, right? These are the cards that you want to be using to generate the card volume and to keep ahead. And so that's the real big thing that I think to keep in note when playing against Delver, is that with the amount of card volume the deck is capable of generating, because of its cantrips, because of things like Restoration Angel, because of Snapcaster Mage, because of endgames like Consecrated Sphinx, and efficient threats like Blade Splicer, I think that you really need to focus on this idea of holding down Delver's card volume and or keeping up with Delver's card volume. This means that your own ways of generating card volume, Terminus, Planeswalkers like Sorin and Gideon, are going to end up being really important for how you win the game. Note how I basically left this Batterskull alone, because if this Batterskull isn't swinging, it's not doing anything. This is one of the problems with equipment, of course. And yeah, sure, eventually this return Batterskull to his hand replay to make a 4/4 is going to get online, and then it's going to become a problem. But once again, that's relatively far in the future, and I had a faster game plan of just sticking this Consecrated Sphinx and winning. So it ended up not being a problem. Actually, this is the illusion, but you get the idea. So anyway, in the Delver versus Control matchup, the biggest thing to think about here is the amount of card volume that Delver can generate. It used to be that Control was just the king of card volume, but as you can see, with the weakening of draw spells in recent Magic, with like stuff like Forbidden Alchemy being the best thing that you have as a Control player, your card volume will suffer a little bit, and that makes you vulnerable to decks like Delver actually being able to run you out of cards. Note that that's just something that didn't happen to Control in the past. When you lost, it wasn't because you didn't have enough cards, it was because you didn't have enough time to cast them. Now you can actually lose because you don't have enough cards, and that is sort of a position that you have to think about when playing against Delver. So anyway, that's all I really had. I wanted to sort of showcase Delver's ability to power through this card volume, and to show you that it in fact is very well capable of generating this high volume type of draw, and pressuring you not only because it's playing strong threats like Restoration Angel, Delver of Secrets, and Blade Splicer, but also because it can extend those threats over the course of the game, and do so in a manner that generates a high amount of card volume. So that's all I had for this week. Hopefully this was an interesting look at one of the lesser focused on aspects of Delver as a deck, but a very important aspect nonetheless when you're trying to figure out how to fight it. Alright, thank you, and I will see you guys next week.